In the blistering summer of 1973, the Rhodesian Bush War was tilting dangerously against the Rhodesian security forces. ZANLA and ZIPRA guerrillas, trained in Tanzania, Zambia, and Mozambique, were infiltrating the northeastern border in ever larger numbers. Conventional sweeps by the Rhodesian light infantry and the Rhodesian African rifles were killing insurgents, but at a crippling cost in time, fuel, and white conscripts who were already voting with their feet by emigrating. Something radical was required. Captain Ron Reid-Daly, a tough, chain-smoking ex-SAS man who had fought in Malaya, was summoned to Bandura Fort in December 1973 and told to raise a new unit. The brief was brutally simple: track, find, and destroy the enemy more efficiently than anyone else. Reid-Daly, however, had been reading Mao, Jiap, and the captured diaries of ZANLA commanders. He knew the guerrillas survived because the rural population fed them, sheltered them, and lied for them. The only way to beat an insurgency that lived among the people was to live among the people more convincingly than the insurgents themselves. The answer was pseudo-operations. Small teams of black and white operators who would dress, speak, walk, cook, and think exactly like ZANLA or ZIPRA sections. But to be truly convincing, Reid-Daly needed something no other counterinsurgency unit in history had ever used on this scale. Real-turned guerrillas, captured or surrendered insurgents who would work for Rhodesia, sometimes willingly, often under duress, but always with lethal effectiveness. The first captured cadre who changed everything was a 19-year-old ZANLA fighter called Morrison Ndlovu. Taken alive near Mount Darwin in January 1974 after a fire force action. He was bleeding from a gunshot wound to the thigh and facing certain execution for possessing an AK-47. Reid-Daly visited him in the field hospital and made a blunt offer: work with the new unit or be handed to Special Branch for the usual treatment. Ndlovu chose life. Within weeks, wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying his own AK, Ndlovu led a 4-man Selous Scouts team back into the same tribal trust lands where he had operated. He greeted local headmen with the correct ZANLA password of the month, complained about sellouts, and asked for maize meal and intelligence on security force movements. Terrified villagers, believing they were hosting a genuine section, told him everything: where the real ZANLA groups were hiding, which crawlheads were Majiba's youth scouts, and the exact routes the next infiltration group would use. On the night of February 17, 1974, Ndlovu's information led the scouts to a rocky kopje overlooking the Ruangwe River. 12 exhausted ZANLA cadres were sleeping under a baobab after crossing from Mozambique. The pseudo team crept to within 10 meters, still speaking Shishona in low voices. Only when the claymore mines were quietly positioned and the offense cocked did the scouts open fire. 11 dead, 1 captured, 0 Rhodesian casualties. The captured man, Andre Rebes' first tame terrorist, would later be christened Lucky because he survived the night. Word of the Ruangwe ambush spread like wildfire inside ComOps headquarters. Reid-Daly received permission to expand the turning program. A secret camp was established at Andre Rabe Farm near Rusape, far from prying eyes. Captured guerrillas were brought there, fed well, given medical treatment, and subjected to a mixture of psychological pressure and genuine offers of amnesty. Some refused and disappeared into the Special Branch system. Many hungry, homesick, and terrified of returning to ZANLA discipline, they agreed to work for the Scouts. By mid-1975, the Selous Scouts had more than 120 turned cadres on strength, each with a new nickname: Black Boot, Chicken Gabriel, Shorty, Sixpence. They were paid better than regular soldiers, issued forged ZANLA paybooks, and taught to fire Rhodesian weapons left-handed so that spent cases fell the communist way during contacts. The real genius of the Selous Scouts lay in how they weaponized their turned guerrillas inside ambushes. The standard tactic was called the frozen cadre technique, and it was as cold-blooded as it was effective. A typical operation began with a turned ZANLA section commander, say, a man called Lovemore who had surrendered after being wounded near Mukambura, being sent ahead of the main scout column. Lovemore would walk openly into a village with 3 or 4 genuine-looking comrades, actually white scouts blacked up and speaking fluent Shona. They would call the villagers to an all-night pungwe, singing liberation songs and demanding food. While the village danced, the turned guerrillas' real job was to identify which young men were mujibas and which krals were hiding weapons. Once the information was confirmed, the pseudo team would leave at dawn, complaining loudly that they were moving to a new base 10 kilometers north. In reality, they would loop back after dark with the killing group, usually 8 to 12 scouts armed with silenced weapons, grenades, and claymores. The turned cadre's finest hour came when real ZANLA arrived. The scouts would hear on their captured Soviet radios that a group was approaching the same village, drawn by reports of a friendly section. The turned guerrilla and his pseudo-team would then wait in the pre-selected killing ground, sitting around a fire exactly as guerrillas did, brewing tea in old jam tins and talking politics. When the incoming ZANLA section greeted them with the correct password, the turned guerrilla would respond enthusiastically, invite them to sit and share sadza. The moment the newcomers put down their packs and began to relax, often within arm's length, the frozen cadres would give the signal, a whispered Chi-Shona phrase, "The baboons are feeding tonight," or simply by scratching the back of the neck. At that instant, every scout opened fire, AKs on fully automatic RPD machine guns from the flanks, grenades tossed into the circle. Because the enemy had been lured into skin-to-skin contact, there was no escape. The turned cadres themselves usually fired first, proving their loyalty and removing any suspicion that they might one day flip back. One of the most audacious examples occurred on the night of the 28th and the 29th of July 1977 near Chimoio in Mozambique, inside enemy territory. Sergeant Andre Rabe led a pseudo-team that included 3 turned ZANLA cadres, Morrison, Sixpence, and a former ZIPRA man called Jonah. Posing as a ZANLA reconnaissance group, they walked boldly into a transit camp housing more than 120 guerrillas waiting to cross into Rhodesia. For 3 days, Rabe's team drank beer, swapped lies about successful attacks inside Rhodesia, and gathered precise details of the infiltration routes. On the final night, they persuaded the camp commander to throw a farewell party. At the height of the singing, Rabe gave the signal. The 4 scouts and their 3 turned cadres opened fire with silenced Sterling submachine guns. In the first 30 seconds, they killed or wounded 47 guerrillas. The rest scattered into the night, leaving behind maps, weapons, and, crucially, radio codes that allowed Rhodesian external raids to be targeted with surgical accuracy for months afterwards. Back inside Rhodesia, the technique reached its peak during Operation Miracle in the Honde Valley, December 1977. A turned cadre called Nevermpofu, once a ZANLA section political commissar, spent 9 days living with a group of 34 hardcore insurgents in a cave complex. Every evening, he radioed grid references on a captured set, pretending to report to Comrade President in Chimoio. When the real attack came, Alouette gunships, followed by parachute-dropped RLI stop groups, never stood on a rock waving a red ZANLA flag so the pilots would not strafe the wrong cave. 32 guerrillas died. Nevermpofu received a Bronze Cross and a farm after the attack. By 1978, the Selous Scouts were killing between 60 and 70% of all insurgents dying inside Rhodesia, most of them betrayed by their own former comrades. The turned cadres had become the sharpest weapon in the armory, but that very effectiveness began to corrode the unit from within. Some turned men began to enjoy the power too much. There were incidents of extortion, rape, and theft carried out under the guise of pseudo-operations. Others, haunted by the faces of men they had eaten sadza with hours before shooting them, started drinking methylated spirits cut with Coca-Cola. A few tried to escape back to ZANLA with warnings. Most were hunted down and killed by their own former handlers. The most infamous case involved a turned ZIPRA cadre known as Sergeant Z. In June 1979, He led a Selous Scout column into an ambush near Victoria Falls that he himself had set up with real ZIPRA units. 6 scouts died before the rest realized what was happening and shot Z in the back as he tried to run. The incident was hushed up, but trust inside the unit fractured. When Lancaster House talks began in September 1979, the British monitors demanded the disbandment of the Selous Scouts as a condition for the ceasefire. Reed Daly was told to destroy all records. Many turned cadres were given new identities and smuggled to South Africa. Others simply vanished into the New Zimbabwe, some to be hunted down and killed by ex-ZANLA comrades during the 1980s purges. Yet for 7 savage years, the Selous Scouts had proved a terrible truth. The most effective way to destroy a guerrilla army is to persuade its soldiers, one by one, to kill their friends. The turned cadres, hungry, frightened, vengeful, or simply trying to survive, were the hidden blade that cut deepest. In the end, Rhodesia lost the war, but in the dark forests and granite hills of the Northeast, the pseudo-teams and their treacherous guides wrote one of the most ruthless chapters in the history of counterinsurgency. And somewhere out there, a few old men still wake sweating from dreams of campfires, whispered passwords, and the sudden, deafening roar of betrayal in the night.